what's a marionette? A marionette is something that's quasi-animated, because it can move. It doesn't really have a soul, but it sort of acts like it has a soul. But a marionette is something that is being manipulated by something else behind the scenes, right? It doesn't have its own volition. It's dependent on the will of something behind the scenes. And so there's a strong implication that whatever this thing is half-formed, and that it's being manipulated by unseen forces behind the facade. Well, that's a Freudian idea. That's you. That's all of you. You know, you're pulled hither and fro by unconscious forces, and some of those are biological and some of them are cultural, you know. And you think about people who are swept up in great ideological movements like the communists or the fascists. It's like, those people are marionettes. That's exactly what they are. They all say the same thing. They all mouth the same words. They all act the same way, and something's behind it. And the question is, what? Well, that is the question, and that's partly what this movie tries to figure out. You see this marionette. He's a half-formed, wooden-headed puppet, and he has a little bit of potential, you know, and the cricket goes up and interacts with him. You notice the cricket is dressed like a tramp. This is so interesting. It's like, so this bug that's a messiah, that's the introduction to the book, that's the conscience, is also a tramp with no home. It's like, what does that mean? And it took me a long time to sort that out. And it's like, he's been everywhere, this tramp. He's been everywhere. And he's traveled the world, but he doesn't have a place. He doesn't have a home. He hasn't made a relationship with anything real yet. He's kind of a potential. And this is one of the things that's really interesting about this movie, because if you think about the cricket as a fragment of the hero and a reflection of the savior, then the story gets strange, because if it was merely a representation of the perfect person, the archetype of the hero, then the conscience would know everything, right? And it would just tell the puppet what to do, and that would be the end of it. But that, first of all, that's a dull story. It's like perfect conscience comes along, puppet does everything it says, bingo, perfection. But that isn't what happens. There's this weird idea that this thing that's got all these attributes needs a home and has to enter into a learning relationship with the thing that it's trying to transform. It's so sophisticated, because, you know, I could say, you should do what your conscience tells you. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe that's not exactly how it works. Maybe your conscience isn't omniscient and omnipotent. Maybe it's not God, right? It's a guide, but it's maybe smarter than you sometimes, maybe because it's society in your head. And obviously it's smarter than you sometimes, because it tells you not to do something and you go do it, and then you get into trouble and you think, well, if I would have just listened, but you don't. And that's interesting too. It's something that you don't have to listen to, which seems to be associated with free will. It's weird. It's like, if your conscience knows what to do, why aren't you just a deterministic puppet of your conscience? Christ, that would work a lot better. You wouldn't have to torture yourself and you wouldn't make any mistakes. So why the separation? Well, maybe it's because the conscience is generic, and so it has to be taught. It has to learn too. And so what you do is you have a dialogue with your conscience. It's something like that, and then you expose yourself to more and more of the world, and you get wiser and your conscience gets wiser, and you mature together. And that's what happens in this story, because the cricket starts out as this tramp that, you know, is smarter than the puppet, but not as smart as he thinks he is, that's for sure. And when he first starts to operate as a conscience, he's completely useless at it. He babbles off a lot of cliches about morality, and then he's late the first day for his job, and he's just not very good at it. And so there's this weird idea that the conscience, which is part of what puts you towards redemption, is something that you actually have to interact with over the course of your life in order for it to develop as you develop. And so then I would also say that the cricket represents, at least in part, what Jung described as the self, which is like the potential, fully developed human being that sort of exists within you as a possibility. But it has to be manifest in the actual conditions of your life. And so the conscience has to learn how to position itself here and now. And it's got generic advice, and that's not good enough. And so that's why the cricket is looking for a home. And so he needs a home. He has to find a specific home before he can become who he could be. Well, so then Geppetto shows up, and he's a kindly old guy, which is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. And And he gives rise to this creation, which is his puppet, which is what culture does, because you're a puppet of your culture, you're a marionette of your culture. And so maybe you could be more than that. And that's the other thing that's strange about this movie, and it's strange about the mythological way of looking at the world, because scientifically, deterministically, there's nature and there's culture, and you are the deterministic product of the interaction between nature and culture. There's nothing else to you than that. That's that. But the mythological world doesn't say that. It says something different. It says that there's nature and culture, and then there's you. And the you that's in there has choices and a destiny, and that you actually affect the interplay of nature and culture in determining your own character. There's always the implication that there's something autonomous about the hero of the story. Geppetto comes along and he's going to finish off the puppet. And so what does he do to finish off the puppet? He gives it a voice. He gives it a mouth. Well, that's really, really interesting. So in Genesis, this is a very, very, very complex idea, and it took people thousands of years to figure this idea out. And it's something like this. So at the beginning of everything, there was chaos, and that was like potential. It was something like potential, the potential for being. And God uses a faculty that he has, which is the word, to call being from chaos, and that's the creation of being, right? It's the manifestation of order from chaos, and it's the word, the logos, that's the tool that God uses to do that. And that logos in Christianity is associated with Christ. The reason for that is that there's an idea that the divine element of the individual is the thing that uses language, communicative language, to call the world into being. And that is what we do, as far as we can tell. It's like you make a decision, you think it through, you talk it over with your friends, you plot a course, and the world manifests itself in relationship to your choice. And the idea is that, well, it's a good thing to let this puppet have its own voice. Well, that's an interesting idea, because what the hell does it know? It's a wooden-headed marionette. Why the hell would you want something like that to talk? Well, it's the same question you have in relationship to your children. It's like, what do they know? They're 2 or 3, you know, they don't know anything. Well, so should you just like tyrannize them and make them do everything you want, or are you going to let them have a bit of a voice? And the question is, it depends on whether you want them to be a puppet or not. And if you don't want them to be a puppet, if you want them to grow up autonomous, then you let them have a voice, and you facilitate the development of that voice. And that's what you do if you don't want a marionette.